OK, we're going to move on. Something completely different now. Is Nigel Farage making a mistake by not standing for election? Reform's honorary president took centre stage as he unveiled the party's election plans yesterday. Now, one of the things that he spoke about was, of course, the Channel migrant crisis.
These young men that come, and I've actually filmed this, I've filmed on the 12-mile median line, people throwing their iPhones into the sea, throwing their passports into the sea, doing everything they can so that we can't track and identify them. Although it's okay, because they get an iPhone, a new one, within 24 hours of arrival. But I think this is a national security issue. I think what we ought to be doing with this situation here is declaring a national security emergency. And this is an emergency.
So he called Reform the UK's new Conservative movement and said that voting Tory would be a waste, but supporters will not be able to vote for him after he decided against standing as an MP. Do you think that's a shame? Or do you think Parliament needs him? 0207 862 2222 is the number to give us a ring. Carole, what do you reckon on this one?
I think politics needs him. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say he's been one of the most important politicians of the past 50 years. You might love him, you might hate him, but I think he's incredibly influential. I think the reason he's not going to stand in this election, he said the other day he wasn't going to stand to be a Tory because he said, why waste your vote on voting Tory? Because the election is a foregone conclusion. He's not standing for reform as an MP because he knows Reform are not going to win any seats. I think Farage has got a plan. I think he knows he has massive support in the country, and he does. And I think he's going to wait until after the election, until the Tories are literally in the toilet, and it will be then seen that there's nowhere for Reform to go. And I think he will then try and revive the right. And I think that he will have a lot of support in doing that. And I don't think he wants to do it now because he stood in general elections 5 times and didn't get a seat because the Tories threw everything to keep him out in those seats. And he stood in 2 by-elections. So I think he's keeping his powder dry. Somebody said to him yesterday, are you not...
It sounds very much like he's running scared then.
No, he's not running scared.
He's lost 5 elections. He's like...
He doesn't want to be a leader.
Somebody said to him yesterday, are you being chicken in not standing for these elections? And he said, I'm being a realist. Because he knows Tories are abandoning ship. They're abandoning their own seats they've had for years. They're running scared. He's going to keep his powder dry until after the election, until the Tories literally are in the toilet.
OK, there was mixed response to his campaign video that he put out on Farage's social media pages yesterday. Take a look at this.
How would you respond to people?
Eyes are odd. What do you make of that, John?
Is that from Reform?
That's from his own social media, Farage's own social media page, so not from Reform.
So absolutely bizarre. Why would anyone who supported Farage put that up? It makes him look like a monster. And also, I really object to using images of desperate people in kind of campaign literature, particularly campaign films that are intended to denigrate those people, many of whom may be entirely legitimate asylum seekers.
Many of whom are not as well.
Well, Carole, we've talked about this many times in other fora, and we know that when people do actually claim asylum, the vast majority of them are accepted as genuine asylum seekers. 75% at the last count. But look, I agree. Look, Carole, I agree with you on 2 things you just said. Farage is a very important politician of the last 50 years. He's the most corrosive, cynical, divisive politician that we have had.
You just insulted huge swathes of the country.
I'm not insulting anyone apart from him.
No,
He has driven so many wedges through British society, a deeply corrosive politician who thrives off playing people off against each other. And I agree, he also has a plan. His plan is for himself. He's having a great showbiz career right now, Storm. He's enjoying the limelight. He loves being Trump's mate. He's going to love interfering in another country's domestic politics hilariously by going on to the US election.
He has been invited to. Can I just say this, as far as the left, this is typical, as far as the left is concerned, anyone who voted for Brexit and anyone who supports the control of immigration is a stinking racist.
Absolutely nonsense. Carole,
Yes,
you put words.
yes,
Carole, you
that's
put
exactly
words.
why
Carole, you
people
put
hate
completely
Farage.
put words in my mouth.
Have to be racist. He has spoken out sort of contrary to our multicultural society. We live in a multicultural society. You would agree with that. And Farage has been quite critical in the past.
Do I think that our multicultural society works? And the thing that he was criticised for the other day was having a go at a minority of the Muslim population in this country who he said loathe British values. Well, if you look at some sections, the vast majority of Muslims live perfectly normal lives and are at one with British values. We have lots of them who are not. We have the people who send their kids to Muslim schools where girls are disenfranchised. We have,
hold on, Carole,
we have Sharia law where women are disenfranchised.
Don't like British culture as well. You have lots of sort of British Christian people that don't like British culture.
But we don't have a law that disenfranchises women. We have a law called Sharia law operating in this country, which makes women third-class citizens. If a Muslim man decides to divorce his wife, he cuts her off, he can throw her into the street. You can't do that in British law. Doesn't happen.
You can't do it. You can't do it in British law.
You can do it in Sharia.
You can't do it in British law. That's the whole point.
That's what I said. You can't.
Yes, but exactly. So people aren't legally disenfranchised.
Do you actually think that a wife who is treated that way by her family and thrown out, do you think she's going to go to a British court? And
Carole, I really object to Muslims being singled out in these.
I'm not saying
that you're doing that. I'm saying that Farage is singling out Muslim people, and I'm sorry.
He was asked the question
when he talks about some anti-British values among Muslims, and when he says. That when he has the gall to talk about sectarian politics, from the most sectarian politician in Britain, with women excluded, there are plenty of Muslim women MPs in this country. It's completely false to say that Muslim women have no political engagement or aren't allowed to rise up to their communities.
But you know exactly the kind of Muslim women I'm talking about, who are not MPs, who have no powers, who are totally disenfranchised by living under Sharia law. You know that.
People are not living under Sharia law in this country.
Yes, they are.
No one is saying that we have perfect race relations, but the last person I would ask to solve race relations in this country is a man who has a history of making racist remarks against all kinds of ethnic minorities.
What's his racist?
Okay, all right, fine. So when he's making, okay, fine. So the Board of Deputies of British Jews accused him in 2020 of making anti-Semitic dog whistles. He said that Muslims.
2020. Do you know what's happened since 2020? Anti-Semitism. Do you know what's happened?
It's completely
it's exploded on the streets of this country. So was he wrong?
When he's saying when he has the gall to talk about sexism, this is a man-storm who said that breastfeeding women should sit in the corner. He said that working mothers will work less.
Oh God, you're really dredging.
When he said that he's got so many women pregnant over the years. When
did he say that?
In 2014,
he said he's got so many women.
Yes, he's made all of these. He's made all of these comments. So he has a different view of maternity leave. Was the end of that quote. So look, this is a man I would not ask Nigel Farage to adjudicate on anything about feminism or sort of race improvement.
OK, let's go to some of our messages. Val on Facebook says it's a big shame. I'd love to see him as a leader, but he is a great campaigner at least. Jamie on Facebook says the last time he stood, he got beaten by a guy dressed as a dolphin. Is that true? Did he get beaten by a guy dressed as a dolphin?
The last time he got beaten, to my memory, is he got beaten in an area where the Tories threw everything but the kitchen sink at it to make sure he was beaten. I've been on the campaign trail with Farage, and whether you agree with him or whether you don't, he is mesmeric to many people in this country. They follow him I went into people's houses with him. Farage is a posh boy. He went into working class people's houses. He had them, in the palm of his hand. Whatever you might think about him, he talks about subjects.
The beer factor, the same thing Boris.
No, but he talks about subjects that
they could go for a beer with Farage.
Other politicians are frightened to say he says, and you're right. The house I walked into with, the guy said, "Do you want a cup of tea?" He said, "I prefer a beer." He had that guy's vote in a heartbeat.
They're frightened to say they don't agree with him because they don't. Look, I agree with you. Carole, I agree with you on one thing. He is an extremely charismatic politician. Look, I had a drink with him in Strasbourg 10 years ago when I worked at the European Parliament. He's very clubbable. He's very personable. That doesn't mean that he's a good person or a good politician or good for this country.
Apparently he lost to John Burkow, who was championed by a guy dressed as a dolphin, so there was some truth in that, but not quite.
Not really.
Lynn from Glasgow, what's your thoughts on Nigel Farage? Is it a shame that he won't be standing?
Yes, I think it is a shame, Storm. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
I think I think the best thing about Nigel Farage, whether you agree with his points of view or not, is he calls a spade a spade. He doesn't double talk. He doesn't try and twist things round about. He's quite straightforward with what he thinks. Whether you agree with what he thinks or not is a different matter.
He's quite
And I think
Thatcherite in that way, isn't he? His policies are his policies regardless of how popular they're going to be, and maybe that's what we need.
I think
we need
Lynn's-
someone to stick by
Lynn's
what they
spot on.
think, Jonathan.
You're spot on, Lynn.
Well, look, some people say that he's a grifter. I actually don't really think that's true. I agree with you that he's had views that have not been popular. He was in favour of Brexit long before Brexit was popular. I think you could certainly contrast with Boris Johnson, a man who only believes in himself. I think Nigel Farage does actually have views. I loathe them, but he also does believe in himself as well, and that's why you've seen him really change his rhetoric. He flirts a lot more with the far right than he used to, actually.
Far-right?
Yes, far-right politicians
far?
in Europe,
God,
Carole.
why do the left do this? If you're not left, you have to be
No,
far
but
right.
you're just putting words in my mouth.
No, I'm
not saying that Rishi Sunak is far right.
What are some of his views then that you believe are far right?
The views about sort of the clamping down on immigration. I remember just in the
You think
debate.
that's far right?
No.
Seriously?
When he went, when the people in his party want to sort of turn the boats away, risking people's lives in the Channel, for example. When he was talked about in the debate a few years ago about people coming to this country with HIV, that was incredibly offensive. There are all kinds.
What we're discussing there is sort of inflammatory language when we're talking about the HIV thing, and I think he's been criticised quite highly for inflammatory language. Lynn, thank you for your call. Patrina from Lancashire, what's your views when it comes to Nigel Farage? Do you wish you could vote for him? I mean, he probably wouldn't be standing in Lancashire.
Yeah, I'd vote for him, definitely, because the thing is sometimes you have to face reality, and I don't think Labour and Conservative I think they're just bouncing off one another, because Nigel Farage is right about the boat people coming over, and it's draining the system, taxpayers' money. And people can say what they want and defend, but there's a lot of boat people that have disappeared into the country.
First of all, Patrina, I'm just going to stop. I don't think we call them boat people. So migrants coming over here in small boats. I've got you.
That's what I mean.
So, and what views does Nigel Farage hold as far as migrants coming over here in small boats that you think that Labour and Conservatives aren't doing? I mean, the Conservatives want to launch their Rwanda scheme. Is that not sort of hard line enough for you?
It is, but it's not. It's not working like they say they want it to. I mean, there's too many people going against it, and it's not happening, which is costing the taxpayer a lot of money, which it has already, as you know. But I just think and feel that Nigel Farage is stating his point because nobody else is, and it just gives a lot of people a lot to think about, because it is draining this country of our taxes, and our taxes are going up.
Patrina, you think Nigel Farage will get the job done far more than the other two parties could. Unfortunately, we won't be able to vote for Farage, but it's interesting to hear everybody's points.